And now we have half an hour time for questions. So first of all, thanks again, Malinda. So if you want to ask questions, please raise your hand. I must say that since I am a host of this meeting, I do not have the function of raising hands. Weirdly, this is not on Zoom. So I would like to exploit my position as a host and ask the first question. Otherwise, I won't have time, presumably. So Malinda, thank you so much. I have so I'm very much interested in the relation between well, shared attention, I should say, and prosocial behavior. And the distinction between mutual attention and shared attention was actually very relevant. It seemed to me very relevant. So one idea that I had is that it seemed to me that mutual attention, you might correct me if I'm wrong, it might be compatible with cases of you know, antagonistic or competitive behavior. So suppose, for instance, here's one example I had in mind. Suppose you and I, we attend, this is the last coffee break of the conference, and I see that there is only one cookie left on the table, and I see that you are looking at the cookie and you are slowly going to the direction of the table. And I also would like to have that one cookie, and you turn to me and you see that I'm looking at you, and then we start running to, you know, try to get the last cookie of the conference. Now, it seems that this is a case of mutual attention. There is, I'm tracking your attention, you are tracking mine. There is some sort of mutual responsiveness between me and you. But the action that situation generates is a competitive one. Whereas in shared attention, it seems that kind of situation is, you know, confined to cases of prosocial behavior, cases where, you know, the emerging action is a shared one, is a cooperative one. Yeah.
Oh, can I stop there first, though? I think that you can have examples, the flip examples in both cases. So in mutual attention, I think Barbora's example in the paper was, maybe I'm mixing this up, but so you can see a woman, an elderly woman, say in a grocery store, looking up at something on a high shelf that she's not going to be able to reach. And if you meet eyes, you'll realize, and in Barbara's helping task too, she's shown that something similar can take place within a prosocial situation. So it's not just, so mutual is not just competitive, it can also be seen in a prosocial situation as well. And I imagine that in shared attention, so we can be, I haven't thought this through yet, but we can be in a competitive game with each other. My teammates competing against you and your teammates, and we're competing, and we're yelling at each other about how we're going to beat you or whatever. So you can have competition within a shared interaction too. I don't think they're tied to one or the other in any way. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you so much. And Brian, I should say, Barbora, anytime you want to jump in, please do. If I'm not answering the question completely or you have something to add, please do jump in. Thank you. So Brian.
Oh, great, thanks. Thank you so much for this super interesting talk. One of the things that's kind of contentious in the ontology of shared intentionality is exactly how to understand the building block mental states of shared states. So we can agree, I think, and a lot of people agree in kind of different perspectives, that there is some kind of second person relation going on, but that doesn't determine what kinds of mental states in the minds of individuals ground those relations. So, I mean, like one set of alternatives is, you know, can we account for shared mental states in terms of either simple or complicated standard mental states like individual intentions, knowledge, beliefs, etc., that interlock with one another? Or else, do we need to postulate a distinct kind of mental state, like a we mode state or a primitive social state, somehow where it's a product of evolution and historical, you know, philosophical theories of attitudes didn't identify, but now we've identified. So in philosophy, as we know, common knowledge or mutual knowledge is standardly understood as the first, a kind of complex of simple mental states. And I think that in philosophy also, in this literature, a lot of debates are kind of confused or not super clear. Even when we talk about we mode states, you have somebody like Searle who's saying, look, there's kind of a primitive attitude, social attitude, or we, it's like a toggle. Some of my intentions are I attitudes and some are we attitudes, and there's like a we flag. Others are more of an analysis of social states in terms of individual states, like Tuomola, who in some ways will kind of decompose them to be grounded into individualistic states. So I just wanted to know kind of whether you think, what exactly you're claiming, whether you think that's testable. It's not clear to me that the joint commitment literature actually bears on this issue. That seems to be a slightly different kind of literature that's not really literature on mental states, as opposed to this distinct question of whether there are distinctive we attitudes.
Okay. I have to say up front that I'm not so up to date on the latest literature in this area, because I recently moved to a university and I've been focused on teaching for the last 3 years and dealing with all that stuff. But there's probably more recent literature that I am unaware of, and I apologize for that at the moment. But so as a psychologist, well, maybe especially one coming from Mike Tomasello's lab for my whole career, basically, my intuition fits more on the side of the individual mental states. So I've read all the old Searle stuff and some Tuomola and all that, but I have a hard time understanding what a we mental state is. I mean, psychologically speaking, I can't grab onto that in the same way that I can with an individual mental state. I need to think about this more and read some of the later literature on this to know for sure, but the way that I am thinking about it is coming from individual mental states coordinating together with others. Whether it's testable or not, that is a really interesting question. And it may well be that something like neuropsychological studies are the only way to do this, that you might see different brain patterns in different situations, in a team reasoning kind of situation or a we attitude kind of situation. But I don't know of any literature on that right now.
Thank you.
Well, okay, no, I was going to bring up the co-representation literature too, but where you're confusing self and other, and that might be relevant here too. So we make errors when we're in joint action, even in very minimal joint action, because we take our partner's mental states too much. But I guess that can be explained either way, both in terms of individual mental states or not.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just add, I think there is some literature that purports to do some testing on this. I'm not sure whether I'm persuaded that it actually does kind of differentiate these two appropriately. But some, I think there is some recent, there's some fMRI literature out there that's trying to do this kind of thing.
Okay, great.
But I don't know that it's that there's anything particularly conclusive at this point.
If any philosophers have any ideas for how to test this and need a psychologist to help them test it with real people, get in touch with me, because that's a really cool question, how to do that. So I'd be interested in hearing ideas for that and seeing if we could come up together with a study together to test it.
Thank you. So Michael, you're the next.
Thanks a lot. So I cannot resist briefly commenting on the exchange that you just had, because it seems to me one might just take the other perspective and say, you have just given a great explication of what the difference between the I mode and the we mode is, because these children engage in certain activities, like they smile at each other, they do this kind of behavior. And of course, I think it's clear that they're in a different psychological state than are children who do not yet engage in such a behavior, or the apes, which on your view at least don't engage in that. So that's an explication of what this difference amounts to.
Sorry, can I follow up on that? How does that make it clear that they're in a we mode and not just in a coordinated that they're coordinating their own individual attention and intentions with the other person?
Well, I mean, it's just a matter of definition again. What is a we mode state? The claim is just that there's a particular state that links people together. And so that's just very abstractly stated, like Searle, for example, states it very generally, and then your findings could be used to give a more specific meaning to what that means in like a micro psychological terms, if you will. That means a certain responsiveness to what other people attend to, post-social motivation, and various sorts of behaviors. And also with the contrast you make with the chimpanzees, you seem to accept that it's in some sense has to do with innate differences also with between humans and chimpanzees. Yeah. So they're less or maybe not at all capable of engaging in this. And I think that's all the only thing that Searle ever meant.
Okay.
But can I ask my question really, which sort of like followed up, has to do with that, because a classical question, of course, has always been, how do these children understand each other in these situations, and can we make sense of the fact that they understand each other if they fail a standard theory of mind tests? Yeah, so because I mean, of course, the theory of mind literature has pushed the age down and down when people, and of course, changed all the definition really what false believers and so on. But I think now you're also pushing down joint attention, and so it seems that it's still the case that there's joint attention prior to passing false belief tests or anything like that. So how do you respond to that? Now it seems to me one response to that is to say, well, maybe we don't really need to assume that children understand mind in the sense that they make a clear separation between mind and body in some sense. Of course, they understand that the person is oriented towards something and takes pleasure in certain things, but it doesn't seem to me that it really needs this differentiation. And so I don't think we should assume necessarily that understanding joint attention means understanding mental state, of course. But of course, again, as you have rightly emphasized, it's a question: what do we mean by understanding that somebody has a mental state?
Okay, there are several things here. So, by theory of mind, in the developmental literature, psychology literature, don't just mean false belief understanding. So, theory of mind is understanding of attention, goals and intentions, seeing, not even just attention, but seeing that you can perceive something, desires, emotions, beliefs, all different types of mental states. So the term theory of mind refers to all of those things, and false belief is just one of them. And I don't think that false belief understanding is necessary for joint attention at all. Just an understanding of seeing, or arguably attending, but seeing should be enough. So seeing, attention, and interest are the only things that you would need to know something about to engage in joint attention. And I can't speak for 6-month-olds, but by 12 months at least, we have lots of evidence from a variety of different experimental studies with infants that they have an understanding of attention, or seeing at least. So around that age, I'm not sure about the exact details, but like they understand things about blindfolds and facing things and barriers and what you can see and not see. And so there are plenty of experimental studies that show that babies have an understanding of seeing, and that's all they need for joint attention.
Thank you. Bernard, you're the next.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to try to push you a little towards a non-reductivist view. So you said, I mean, your model, joint attention is a look and a smile. I have a big problem with the smile part, because if you say that joint attention sort of presupposes communication, my question then obviously is, what is communication? And I'd say, well, there you are in the classical regress problem, because obviously, you know, in order to communicate, we need to assume that we're experiencing together. So it sort of presupposes what it's supposed to explain. Same problem, and that's a purely philosophical thing. You needn't even look at the actual behavior. That's a conceptual point. Same point with regards to joint commitment, where you say, I think these are the words you used, joint commitments create joint attention. This sounds like there is joint commitment and then there is something else that's being created by the joint commitment. And I'm pretty sure that's probably not the way you really want to put it. Maybe you want to say joint attention involves joint commitment, but surely there cannot be a procedure that doesn't involve joint attention. That is joint commitment. Surely, again, the regress problem arises. And thinking further along these lines, one might consider whether the way you basically conceive of what you're investigating as a triangular thing, where there is, you know, these connections between the three angles. And an alternative way would be to conceive of the relation to the object as one relation in which two participate. So that would be a radical sort of change in thinking about what's going on. So maybe attention, whatever it is, attitude, mental state, maybe it's actually shared and two participate in it. And that could encourage to, I like very much the way you distinguish the third personal from the second personal, but maybe there's a further step to the first person plural. Maybe it's not just the second person, but actually the first person plural. So maybe, just maybe, the way in which we know of each other when we share is more of the kind of knowledge we have of ourselves than of knowledge of anything else.
Okay.
I forgot to ask a question. Here is a question. Why are you so obsessed about the demarcational enterprise? Why is it so important whether our relatives can do it or not? I mean, that sort of always puzzles me. I mean, don't you want to find out what it is and then maybe look whether they have it or not, rather than trying to sort of distance ourselves from these other critters?
Okay, sure. Yeah, it just came about that way in response to being jumped on by people like Dave Levins telling us that, hey, wait a minute, you're wrong in your claims, and chimpanzees do this too. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time watching chimpanzees, and you notice when you do that what's missing and what's difficult to train them to do, and the kinds of things that they don't do that we do, that even little babies do, and you have to explain that somehow. And thinking about that makes you realize how special what we do is. I mean, we never would notice. So if you're a parent and your kid is pointing for you, most normal parents don't even think that's special. They don't notice it, and they don't realize how special it is when it's something that only humans do. And as far as we know, no other animals do, or that's the claim. And so I guess that's what drives the interest in it. Is also frustration with trying to train chimpanzees to do things for hundreds and hundreds of trials and then just not getting it, even though they're the smartest animals. That you think, what's missing here? Why can't they do this? It's so simple. And it just shows you how special it is what we're doing, and the things, again, that we wouldn't notice, that normal people don't notice about what we do. And so that's why I find it exciting or interesting to study chimpanzees, even though it's frustrating because they don't do what I want them to do. Okay, so you have three at least different issues that you brought up before that. And the one is the chicken and egg problem of communication. And that's something that I get a lot. I would say that there are different types of communication. I mean, language, so joint attention is, if not necessary, at least very helpful for learning language in the first place. So there has to be some kind of joint attention before language, but language is a special thing. That's a big, different type of communication. You're talking, I assume, about just referential, gestural, nonverbal communication, right? There are different ways of communicating. So if you think about the top-down communication and bottom-up communication, if there's a, so think about declarative pointing, in which I see something interesting over here. I don't think you've seen it yet, and I want to show it to you. So I have to get your attention to it, and I might do that by pointing and saying, hey, look over there. That doesn't presuppose any shared attention. It presupposes something like you being able to see and you having interest in the kinds of things that I might want to show you, but it doesn't presuppose the reference. In fact, it's by definition, you haven't seen it yet, and I want you to see it. So that type of communication clearly to me doesn't require any pre-existing joint attention. I'm trying to create this joint attention with you in that case. Does that help with?
I mean, it clearly presupposes that you take yourself to be experiencing and investigating the world together with others. You know, it cannot be
that I can do that with you. Not that I am right at this moment, because I could tap you on the shoulder. We could be not interacting at all, and then you turn around and look at it.
Yeah. I mean, clearly the other person hasn't seen the object, but the reason why you're pointing, so sort of the understanding of what it is you're doing, is clearly that you're sort of establishing what's already the general structure, right? So, I mean, if you assume that we're sort of monads, you wouldn't get a pointing behavior, and people think that this is the way to analyze we attitudes. You know, the pointing would be a move in a joint game already, so that you cannot explain the jointness by the move. So that's the chicken and egg problem.
Well, that's maybe where this new study that we're doing will help us, because we are looking at how communication and joint attention, in the broad sense of the term, develop in relation to each other. And so if we're seeing that kids start looking at each other, looking at their parents or the experimenter in joint attention, mutual attention-like ways before they're showing any evidence of communication, and it's not, that will tell us one thing, whereas if we see that from the beginning the kids are already communicating with their shared communicative looks, so expressive looks about things, or that we're seeing this very early, that may suggest that communication is coming in at the same time as joint attention. Or we just have to look at these mutual looks, so the looks without communication, to see where they're coming from, what they're doing, what communication adds to them, whether later communication like gestures and even language is related to the emergence of sharing looks. So are the kids who start sharing looks early the same ones who start gesturing early, or even at the same time? So if there's a communicative revolution where they're at, say, 7-8 months, kids are getting all the stuff together as a cluster of abilities, then that suggests to me that they're tightly related or the same thing. That shared attention is communication. It's the first instance of communication. So I know I'm not answering this question well, and it's a question, the chicken and egg communication and joint attention problem is one that I've been struggling with for years. But let's say for now that we need further investigation and we need developmental studies to see where each of these are coming in and what their relation to each other is. Thank you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. So Abby, it's you.
Hi. I thought this is a terrific talk, and I guess I had a question that you felt that the communicative element was crucial for a kind of full-blooded jointness of attention. And I guess I was wondering how exactly that should be interpreted. You know, if there's a kind of gesture that's involved in communication, is it one that I felt like there was a kind of imperatival element to that, right? So that what's going on when the child is kind of communicating and gesturing in this way is that she's getting the partner to attend to something, right? And now later in the talk, you distinguish between a kind of merely just imperatival communication and a declarative communication. And I was wondering, then I thought, oh, well, maybe I'm not quite understanding the declarative, because the imperatival, you associated that as something to do with the great apes, which don't have the kind of full-blooded jointness that you're advocating, that we have. And so I was wondering exactly how to understand the declarative notion of gesturing, because I was tempted to think, well, look, what the child is really doing is getting the other person to tend to and share an interest in something. And so in effect, the child is manipulating the adult. And this, I think, would actually solve the kind of chicken and egg or circularity problem that you're faced with, right? Because, you know, you don't have to actually presuppose a kind of notion of communication that itself presupposes joint attention, right? Because if you think of communication as manipulating the other person, who you know has a kind of point of view and stuff, if you manipulate them, right, then you're not presupposing the problem. I mean, you're solving the problem that Bernard was raising for you. So I was just wondering how exactly you understood what a kind of declarative gesture was supposed to be, and whether you're friendly to this kind of imperatival spin on it.
Okay, and so it's true that in some types of declarative communication, there is an underlying imperative, in the sense that if you say, look, you're telling them, look, you know, you're asking that, you're requesting or telling them to do something. So, but in other types, like, for example, the video clip that I showed with the mother and baby just smiling at each other, that's very declarative, but there's no imperative there because the stimulus is already there. It's a bottom-up, it's already salient stimulus, so you don't have to call their attention and say, look. So if there's some big noise or big stimulus, then you don't need the imperative, look, it's already out there for everybody to see or hear in that case. And so it's just the pure sharing declarative without any imperative involved. Does that help that part of it?
Yeah, no, that helps. But I was just thinking it's not merely getting them to look at it, but it's also getting them to take an interest in it. And so the child might look at the parent, and if the parent is not taking an interest in it, the child is going to say, you pay attention to this and be interested in this. Like I'm always telling my children, you should get interested in this. Don't just, you know, I know you're seeing it, but now be interested in it. I mean, you might not like how this sounds, because it sounds, it's like me foisting my kind of interest and agency on the other. And that doesn't seem very shared, but like once you think about, you know, reciprocity considerations, right? And so that not only do you kind of foist your interest on others, but they foist it on you and you're very receptive to that, then you might get this kind of element of sharedness that, you know, you're going after.
And Alessandra, are we out of time? I saw you raising your hand. I just wanted to check whether
Yeah, maybe we should move on. There are at least three other questions. So we still have some time, but if you could give up a brief answer.
To say just briefly in one sentence. So from Ulf Laskowski's work, the kids just give up basically. If you're not interested, you're not worthy of I mean, they assume interest, and if not, then they give up. Later, we might try to force our kids to be interested in things, but the babies aren't really going to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So Anna, please, brief question, if possible.
As brief as possible. So that was a great talk, and I'm very happy to hear that the 9 months revolution is earlier than we all thought in the beginning. But I do have a problem, because all these experimental studies you reported from are studies in between infants and adults. And I would say this is an asymmetric interaction, in the sense that adults, of course, have more cognitive abilities than infants. And so my question is, maybe and that you can see it that early is dependent on the fact that you have experts in the interaction. And I would ask you whether there are any studies how young infants can be and have joint attention in between infants.
Yeah, good question. And Bakeman and Adamson have some work on this that shows that peer joint attention is basically non-existent for quite a while. But it's also not the case that in some of these experiments that the adults are driving things completely, because maybe in a mother-infant free play interaction, yes, the mother's bringing things into the view of the infant and so on. But for example, in the Salter study that I talked about, the adult is just sitting there looking at the infants, and it's completely spontaneous behavior on the part of the infants. So they're the ones who are deciding to look to the adult. He's just sitting there doing nothing. So there is something coming from the infants themselves. It's just they have a hard time coordinating with babies their own age. Although that was just, I mean, an early study, and nobody's really followed up on it as far as I know. So it's time to revisit those studies to see if you put them in the right situation. Maybe they would do something if you put them in a situation like the toy, the moving toy or the lights kind of studies. Maybe they would look at each other. I don't know. But they're not as competent with each other as they are with adults. That's true.
Elizabeth? I guess you're muted.
Thanks for the great talk. My question is about your scale. So you said that the second person last two bits are actually acquired probably earlier than the first part of the scale. But it seems to me, at least the first element of the scale, the gaze following, is something that's required for second person forms of joint attention. I mean, if you're not able to understand what another is attending to, okay. So my question is really, is the difference between the elements of the scales a difference in the types of skills involved, or is it really rather a difference in the type of motivations? Okay. You go for joint, or you achieve joint attention first because you're motivated to share, and perhaps less motivated to compete for cookies.
Well, okay, but we are very motivated to watch and make sense of people's behavior. So we're constantly observing, you know, mom is walking around doing things, and I as a baby am watching her trying to figure out what she's doing, surely. So I don't think it's a motivational thing as much as, and so I probably rushed through this, but recall that there are two types of gaze following. One is within a second personal interaction, and one is this observer's third person perspective on somebody. And one reason we can't say for sure whether this is the case, that these second personal things develop earlier than third, is that every study basically of infants is done, almost everyone is done within a second personal natural interaction. And so we don't have the studies, we don't have the data to say whether infants can follow gaze from a purely third person point of view. There are some studies like that at 18 months, but not down at the younger ages. Those are always done in a more natural context or on a computer screen where it's difficult to know anyway, but still kids do better with communication and second personal type stuff coming at them from the computer screen than they do in a non-natural situation. So we don't know for sure that babies can't engage in this third person gaze following, in large part because the studies haven't been done. So I was there mainly talking about common attention, which these recursive inferences or perspective taking in general might be harder than doing something within a second person natural interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So Bill, last question.
Okay, great. So I found the sort of what you reported about the longitudinal study was sort of really interesting, but I was wondering now how the revised timeline matches up with or is different from or the kind of communicative gaze that you get in social referencing in things like the visual glyph task and so on. Is that a much earlier kind of thing, or do those timelines now look as though they match better?
They could do, yes. So I'm trying to think back to when I present the social referencing literature to my students, and the thing that I focus on most there is when kids start actually changing their behavior based on what they see, and that's later, but they do start looking and gaining information early. And yeah, I mean, even in these very early dyadic interactions, you're seeing lots and lots of eye contact. So the eye contact has been there from 2 months, basically. Social referencing is about a third thing. I mean, Vasireddy would argue that already this second personal and early primary intersubjectivity is already maybe about the interaction itself, and so already joint attention. So the answer is that we don't know exactly what the relation is. So kids are social referencing in the sense of looking to others to decide whether to cross a cliff or not quite early. And I don't know what these looks are in the task that I presented, where there's a toy, a robot, or a flashing light or something. The thing is, with the flashing light, it's clearly an interesting stimulus. It's not scary in any way.
Sure.
The robot, it may or may not be. And so
Yeah.
that's something that we have to look into more carefully to see whether there are differences between the different tasks and how they relate to communication and dyadic and triadic, and because we don't know yet, but we're working on it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, excellent. So please join me in thanking Malinda once again for this super interesting talk, and thank to all of you for this very nice discussion. Remember that in almost 6 minutes, more or less, the ISOS assembly will start. So if you're interested in participating in that assembly, stay on the meeting or reconnect to the same by using the same link you have used to connect to this.